My name is Jaden. The topic I want to raise is about like evolution versus creation. So it's not as political.
Interesting. Does Charlie Kirk even claim to know anything about biological evolution?
It's not a topic I know the best, but I have strong opinions on, so you have to understand I'm not as literate as I should be.
Okay, so Charlie is not literate on evolution. Does Jaden, our question asker, know anything about biological evolution?
I started just like reading books and listening to podcasts that talk a lot about evolution and natural selection and those principles. And I find that's a much better lens to look at the world. Like, for instance, you talk about like a meritocracy. All that is natural selection, like the cream rises to the top.
I see. No. It seems Jaden doesn't want to talk about biological evolution, but rather social Darwinism, the 19th century idea that misapplied Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection to human societies, politics, and economics. It takes the imprecise, ill-coined phrase, survival of the fittest, which has caused all kinds of misconceptions in biology as well, to justify colonialism, racism, and laissez-faire capitalism. Unless I'm misjudging Jaden.
There's a lot of like psychological things too in humans. Like one example I'll bring up is, I mean, would you say as a general rule of thumb, like women are the sexual gatekeepers and men are the sexual pursuers?
Oh, this will be great. Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians. And today, we're going to respond to Charlie Kirk's attempt to prove that Christianity is true. This will not be a political video. Don't worry, we're just going to be talking about his flimsy, but remarkably common, defense of Christianity. If you're lucky enough to not know who Charlie Kirk is,
he's part of a new wave of young pro-Trump personalities who have risen to prominence with unwaveringly loyal media and podcast appearances since the president trounced Democrats in the election last year. Charlie has 5 million followers on X, 6 million on Instagram, and millions more across Facebook and TikTok. During the run-up to the 2024 US election, the 31-year-old toured 25 different universities in the United States as part of his You're Being Brainwashed tour. And as part of this tour, he held rallies encouraging Marxist students to debate him on a wide range of topics.
And we're going to join him in progress during said You're Being Brainwashed tour, talking to a student named Jaden, who I suspect is not actually a Marxist. The first several minutes are awkward because Charlie is going to badly fumble scientific ideas he's not trained for.
We do not have any evidence, nor can you. You can guess in the fossil record of actual species change. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And that is what evolution contests, is that it's a lot of, it would be like rolling snake eyes 23 billion times in a row. That's how improbable evolution is.
And Jaden is going to fumble with sociology ideas he's not trained for. So let's jump ahead to where it gets interesting.
But I feel like there is one truth. There has to be.
There has to be, right?
And your argument is God provides us that truth through the Bible. But then why is your truth the truth?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, because through both reason and revelation, though. So God gives us both. Revelation, of course, is the scriptures. Reason is our ability to interact with the natural world to see if the scriptures are actually true.
Not a terrible start. Like Charlie, I would agree that the natural world is the objective reality against which we test religious and supernatural claims. If a holy book says something that conflicts with reality, we affirm that reality is correct and the religious claim is wrong.
If somewhere within the Bible, I were to find a passage that said 2 plus 2 equals 5, I wouldn't question what I'm reading in the Bible. I would believe it, accept it as true, and then do my best to work it out and to understand it.
Have you tested Christianity this way, Charlie?
So why is Christianity true? Well, first, let's just test the 10 Commandments. If you follow the 10 Commandments, your life will be objectively better and your society will be objectively better, right?
Okay, that's a lot. Where to start? First, the 10 Commandments are from the Hebrew Bible. That's the Old Testament to you, and are part of the shared heritage of all the Abrahamic religions. So any argument from the 10 Commandments would equally be evidence for Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Probably not where Charlie would want to go, given his recent comments about Europe. Second, objectively better for society is an incoherent phrase, unless you've already agreed upon a clearly defined set of criteria or goals, and agreement on how to measure outcomes. Unlike reality, which is an objective standard by which one can evaluate truth claims, these qualitative claims are tricky. Maybe some of the measures would be well-being, equality, sustainability, liberty, happiness, comfort, or safety. but in what combination? And is the scorecard measuring the well-being of the best-off members of society, the well-being of the average member of society, or perhaps the well-being of the worst-off member of society? For example, I doubt there would be general agreement here on whether universal health care is objectively better or worse. Third, at least 5 of the 10 commandments are found in law codes that predate Exodus. And we're talking about the good 5, the ethical and social commands. Do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not lie, and even honor your father and mother. All have clear analogs centuries earlier in Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Hittite codes. So appealing to these is actually to appeal to polytheism, cult practices, and anthropomorphic gods and goddesses like Inanna and Enki.
I mean, not killing, not murdering, not stealing, honoring your parents, not having anything above the idea of a sovereign God, right? Resting for 1 day a week, not lying. These are things that we can all agree, like, okay, that's a good way to build society.
Finally, by my lights, the 10 Commandments are not obviously good for society. 3 of the 10 commands have nothing at all to do with human interaction. Having no gods before me, make no graven image, and don't take the Lord's name in vain. These are purely personal between you and God, and service only the vanity of the God. They affect society only to the extent that the jealous God is going to reward or punish said society based on this coerced worship. The not coveting command not only treats women as property of men, it is purely a thought crime, but is actually the heart of capitalism.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
In fact, if you want to look exclusively to the Christian version of these commands, Jesus said that hating your brother is the same as murdering them, and that a lustful thought is the same as adultery. So they're all thought crime. Are thought crimes the best way to anchor society? The 10 Commandments don't advocate virtue or any positive actions. They are authoritarian, and they lack nuance where considerations interplay. I would have had much more respect for Charlie if he had instead advocated for Jesus' golden rule, loving your neighbor as yourself. There are much better versions of that command, and many versions that predate Jesus by centuries. But it's better than the 10 Commandments.
But let me just one thing. The 2 miracles that Christianity hinges upon is creation, which I think you're almost there-ish, that there was a beginning to everything. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Based on Charlie's ramblings that we skipped over, it's clear that he thinks that the Big Bang is the beginning. But really, that was merely a point of rapid expansion and the start of our particular instantiation of spacetime. Scientific cosmologies do not propose that it is the origin of matter and energy. In whatever way it makes sense to talk about something existing before time, neither Charlie nor I are qualified to talk about this, but the actual experts don't talk about the beginning of everything in this way. Despite the impression Lawrence Krauss's inaccurately titled book gives to people who don't actually read it, only religious creationists posit something from philosophical nothing.
And then the resurrection. And the resurrection is the greatest, most documented miracle in human history.
This isn't remotely true, no matter how often Christians repeat it. The resurrection is documented in Paul's letters and the Gospels, which are really only one source, since their resurrection claims are literarily dependent on each other. We'll come back to this. All later reports, like the writings of the Church Fathers, are based on the letters and Gospels, and so add no corroboration nor attestation. The Golden Plates of Mormonism, on the other hand, have signed affidavits from 11 people, which is far more documentation. Sure, some left the church, but none recanted. The so-called Marian apparitions of Zaytun, which I did a video about a while back, were witnessed by tens of thousands, with many dozens of interviews and reports. It was photographed and reported by both Muslim and Christian media. That's more documentation than the resurrection. Some modern miracle claims have photos or videos, which is better documentation than testimony, even if they're still unconvincing to me.
And we believe, of course, it to be true. It defies every other historical explanation.
There are many historical explanations put forth, many of which are fully sufficient, depending on what facts you think need explaining. Of course, I'm partial to the minimal witnesses hypothesis for the origins of Christianity, on which I've made several videos. But there's also stolen body, wrong tomb, hallucination, cognitive dissonance, pareidolia, RHBS model, mythicism, and even Jesus had a twin that fooled everyone, among countless other options and flavors.
So in order for an atheist to be able to wrestle with the resurrection, you must answer, who is Jesus Christ?
A first-century apocalyptic preacher. There's not much controversy about that, even if we think he also had other attributes.
Okay, what happened to his body?
The same thing that happened to every crucifixion victim in that place and time. The same thing that would have happened to the thieves on either side of Jesus, assuming they existed. The answer to the question depends on who disposed of the body. If it was the Romans, they left it hanging since humiliation was part of the punishment, until eventually whatever wasn't eaten by animals was tossed into an unmarked mass grave. If you believe the flimsy and bewildering evidence the Jews were granted an exemption from this, then the family had next dibs if they were rich or influential enough to ask. But it seems Jesus' family was from out of town and not well connected enough to get him. The last resort was the religious leaders, who were tasked by religious law to get rid of all the bodies quickly, but to put them in one of two graveyards designated for criminals, where shame and being forgotten was also part of the punishment. So, in all the usual cases, the body would have ended up somewhere unknown by his followers and unremembered by officials. The early Christians knew this, which is why they had to invent an influential figure called Joseph of Arimathea to fill in the plot holes. But there's no reason to prefer this fiction over accepting that what usually happened also happened to Jesus.
Why did all of his followers die a death voluntarily afterwards?
Certainly not all of his followers died a voluntary death. There's no martyrdom of Mary Magdalene legends, and even if you're more specific to say the 12 died as martyrs, then we have strong evidence for only 1 or 2 being murdered, and those were definitely not voluntary. Dr. Sean McDowell's PhD dissertation was on this topic, and he said this when he and I debated the topic on the Unbelievable show.
I think there's also been a hyper trust by many Christians who read martyrs and says, hey, they all died as martyrs, and they proclaim it. Well, I've made that claim in the past, so I repent on this show from making that before I did my research. That should be corrected as well.
Why were all the original witnesses women, which in the old world you never would have had women witnesses, right? A lot of misogyny back then.
Yes. Thank goodness we've eliminated all misogyny in modern times. The Gospels portray women as the discoverers of the tomb for narrative reasons. Women were more likely than men to tend to bodies, so that's a detail of verisimilitude to make the account seem more realistic. It was an established story detail that all the male disciples had fled town, so Mark couldn't use them. And a subversion of expectations was the author of Mark's running theme of his gospel, the first one written, which this played into perfectly. By the time the other gospel writers were changing Mark a decade or more later, that detail was too entrenched in Christian lore to alter. Not to mention, women then, just as they are now, tended to be the religious decision makers in the household. Christians brag about how influential women were in the early church. Clearly, women believed women.
Why did we have all these people that from the first threshold, the second threshold, eyewitnesses say that Jesus Christ rose from the dead?
The only person from whom we have a first-hand account of seeing resurrected Jesus is Paul, and whatever vision he saw was after the ascension, and as far as we know, he never met Jesus to know what he looks like, so it's all a bit strange. All the other accounts are not first-hand. They might be second-hand, they might be 10th-hand, they might be entirely fabricated. We have no idea. None of the Gospels even claims to be from an eyewitness. So Charlie has some work to do to support this idea.
So all of this, canon, and I don't expect you to believe it.
I'm glad you weren't expecting us to believe it, because we don't. And for much better reasons than you're putting forth to believe it.
Is hinging on that one event. So it's not about Jonah the whale. It's not about parting the Red Sea.
Charlie doesn't want to defend the whole Bible. The whale story, the Red Sea story, must not seem defensible to him. I wonder how he feels about talking snakes.
It's creation, resurrection. That's it.
Yeah,
and if those two things are true, everything else in the Bible can be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I agree that for an atheist to try to disprove theism or at least Christianity, it would be almost impossible to say, why would people die to say, Jesus died on the cross for me and I saw it. Why would I admit, I'm from your perspective, why would I admit, yeah, I saw him die and rise from the dead?
No. An atheist doesn't need to explain someone dying for their belief that Jesus rose from the dead until such time as a Christian demonstrates that anyone died for their belief that Jesus rose from the dead. The well-attested Christian murderers I would grant are Peter, Paul, and James, the brother of Jesus. Christian scholars agree these are the only ones they can defend.
And that's why the disciples jumped in with both feet. They were willing to die. The three big guys, James, the brother of Jesus, Paul, and Peter, we have first century sources for their martyrdom, all three of them. So they weren't just willing, they did go to their death for what they believed.
James was killed secretly by a political rival, not for his beliefs. Peter and Paul were killed as scapegoats for the fire of Rome. Again, not because of what they believed. Listen to me, Jared. Honest Christians can't say that anyone died for this belief. The sophisticated ones know the best they can say is that the disciples were willing to die, even if it didn't happen. I also dispute this more modest claim. See my recent The Truth About How the 12 Apostles Died video. If you're an atheist, as you say, ask for the evidence. Don't take Charlie at his word.
For example, and so again, the answer people would give is like the Jonestown cult, that people can do really crazy stuff if they're convinced by a certain leader. I'm not convinced by that argument.
Charlie's referring to a resurrection objection I mentioned earlier, sometimes called cognitive dissonance. Resurrection scholar Gary Habermas recently discussed this idea with the aforementioned Sean McDowell in an interview.
Cognitive dissonance is a view that is often applied to the Seventh-day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses or groups like that who made prophecies. The famous one, 1844 for the Seventh-day Adventists, and they sold their goods. You can help me there, Sean. Didn't they go out in the mountain in white garments and wait for Jesus to return? And he didn't come, but they sold their homes and they sold everything. And what happened when Jesus did return? Well, then almost always the move will be, we refigured the numbers. It's next month. Okay, great. We'll do it next month. So you go and do it next month, and he still doesn't return. So we would think these people would turn and walk away, right? Well, many of them did. But cognitive dissonance says, no, some of them bore down and got even more radical and said, oh, well, we said Jesus was going to return. We've misinterpreted return. What really happened was he entered into the Holy of Holies in heaven and gave a sacrifice for us. So 44 is still a key date in our history. See, and in most of those cases, dissonance theory says that many of these people, they shouldn't say most, but many of these people return to the faith with a new interpretation and a greater depth of faith.
In situations where religious followers are faced with concrete evidence that they are wrong, some of those followers may pivot and double down rather than abandon their belief. I don't personally think this alone is sufficient to explain the origins of Christianity, but I do think that it was a probable contributing factor to how Peter interpreted his own grief hallucination and a part of what convinced John and James to believe him, while the rest gave up and went back to fishing.
But for example, like James, the half-brother of Jesus.
Charlie doesn't articulate this well, but I'm assuming he's buying into the poorly supported notion that James was a non-believer during Jesus' lifetime and became one later. There are plenty of psychological and sociological reasons for James to take up his brother's mantle, not the least of which would have been as a way to turn the utter shame Jesus brought on his family and turn that into a respected position in the community as James the Just, who is beloved by believers and non-believers alike in the end.
Paul, who had no reason whatsoever, formerly Saul, persecuted Jews, led a great life, converted to Christianity, died a terrible death in prison.
Paul's letters make it clear that he converted because of a vision and revelation. Jesus didn't have to actually rise from the dead for Paul to have a vision. Emperor Constantine also converted because of a vision. It was a thing.
From the upside down resurrection of Thomas, like
you're mixing up Thomas with Peter. One well-known legend was that Peter was crucified upside down. But modern Christian scholars affirm this didn't happen, as it's incompatible with the verse in the Gospel of John.
Okay, so Fox's Book of Martyrs, the last thing he said is at his own request. Let me ask you a question, David. Do you think the Romans were in the business of taking requests about how you wanted to be crucified? As a whole, the Romans were not invested in trying to kill you the way you wanted to die. It was to humiliate and punish you in the way they thought best made that example. Could there be a possible exception? Sure. One thing we know about crucifixion, again, in the vast majority of cases, although there might be some exceptions, is that somebody was stripped bare. The idea was to humiliate and shame them. Yet in John 21, what does Jesus tell Peter? You will be taken where you do not want to go. You will be clothed by another. That's enough to give me pause and go, ooh, I think maybe he experienced in the death of Nero. People had these flammable kinds of clothes that were put on to be burned to death. I think that's probably more likely. Bottom line, whether he was crucified upside down or crucified at all, that doesn't undermine our confidence that Peter died as a martyr, which is the heart of my task.
The conflicting legends about Thomas have him stabbed by spears, dying everywhere from India, Persia, China, and Turkey. The late martyrdom stories were written centuries after and include all kinds of fantastical elements like wizards, dragons, talking animals, zombies, cannibals, and walking crosses. These are not to be taken seriously.
These people had no reason to die the way they did, yet they saw something that compelled them to all of a sudden put everything on the line, which was the belief that Jesus rose from the dead.
Aside from Peter and John, we have no compelling evidence that any of the original 12 actually claimed that Jesus rose, or were even out preaching, let alone putting their lives on the line for it. Demonstrate this before asking me to explain it.
Now, believe this was crazy. The Romans gave them an opportunity saying, you can believe in Jesus, you just can't say he rose from the dead. They said, no, I refuse to give an inch on that.
I think Charlie is alluding to a letter from Plenny the Younger in the 2nd century, so this didn't affect any of the so-called eyewitnesses. Pliny had never dealt with Christians before, so he was unsure about how to punish them. There can't have been much of a Roman war on Christianity if the governor of one of the provinces was unclear as to the policy. To close the loop here, Pliny was told not to actively hunt down any Christians. If one happens to show up in court, just give them a chance to worship Roman gods and pardon them if they do. The whole thing was very live and let live for most Christians at most times before 250 AD.
And so there's something there so powerful that it inspired an early church across an entire region and religion that swept the world.
Popularity isn't a measure of whether something is true. Otherwise, in a few years, Charlie may have to convert to Islam when that becomes the most popular religion on earth.
And so that's enough for me to believe that it's true.
In my view, those are very terrible reasons to believe.
Not to mention we have 4 different, actually if you count Acts, 5 different eyewitness accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then Acts, of different perspectives of this one singular event.
I'm sorry, Charlie, but it's nearly universally accepted that Luke and Acts are written by the same person. It cannot be a different perspective if it's the same author. Acts is a sequel to Luke. That's like saying that Dune 2 provides a different perspective on the sandworms of Arrakis than Dune 1 does. So no, it's not 5, and it's not 4 either. Mark was the first gospel written, and the authors of Luke and Matthew copied it nearly word for word, so they are not independent sources. And with John being written decades later, few scholars put forth that the author of John didn't have a copy of Mark to follow along with. Ultimately, these are 3 different authors taking their chance to correct what they saw as flaws with Mark for theological agendas. And technically, even Christians agree that Mark and Luke were not written by eyewitnesses, since those alleged authors never met Jesus. People shouldn't think that Matthew and John are written by witnesses either, but that's another battle for another time. Or watch my video, Who Really Wrote the Gospels. I'm generally willing to grant that Paul is an independent source, though the gospel authors seem to know about him too. So to be charitable, I'll give you 2 different perspectives, but not 5. You called this the You're Being Brainwashed tour. Did you ever consider that you're the one being brainwashed with low quality, low evidence Christian apologetics answers, Charlie? You seem to be accepting at face value any positive thing you've heard about Christianity, apparently without looking into it for yourself, or you'd know these are bad answers.
And then we have Josephus.
I know that an author named Tom Schmidt is making the rounds with his new book, advocating that Josephus's Testimonium Flavianum is authentic, opposing the current scholarly consensus that it's mostly or entirely a forgery. But really, all Josephus can tell us is that Jesus had a brother, and Catholics don't like that.
And then we have the 2nd and 3rd rate historians that say that something happened in this region at that time.
I'm not sure why you're bragging about 2nd and 3rd rate historians. 2nd rate means lower quality. Maybe you should read some 1st rate historians. You could start with Dale Allison.
And then also, I don't expect you to be persuaded by this, but like accepting Jesus into my life changed everything for me.
I'm glad you have the self-awareness to realize that your personal experience is non-transferable as a reason why someone else should believe. Every religion has changed life claims. Most self-help fads have changed lives. A lot of hobbies have changed lives.
It changes your perspective, changes your worldview, changes who you are from within, and it gives you purpose that nothing else can explain.
Basic psychology explains it. We're meaning-making creatures. Our brains are wired to find patterns and narratives that help us feel stable and significant. People find purpose in hobbies, in relationships, in work. People fall in love with their soulmates, sometimes multiple different soulmates, yet those are all different people. It's not objective. I don't doubt that your positive feelings are real, but I'm highly dubious of your introspection and conclusions about what you are attributing these feelings to.
I appreciate hearing your input
Thank
on
you.
it.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Well, Christians and non-Christians alike, what do you think? Did Charlie do a good job of defending his belief that Christianity is true? Drop down into the comments and let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and tap on the thumbnail on screen now for more of this former Christian taking a look at the claims of Christians, and I'll see you over there. Until next time, later.